I had just finished my morning stretch when the pill was pressed into my hand. It was small, plain, nothing remarkable at first glance. My nephew's partner said it would help with the dizziness I'd been having, and I took it without thinking. At my age, you learn to trust what people bring you when they say they're helping. The room felt calm enough, the light steady through the curtains, but something in my chest tightened when I noticed the nurse standing in the doorway. She didn't move at first, her eyes locked on the pill resting in my palm, and the color drained from her face with a quiet urgency I couldn't place. She stepped closer, slow and deliberate, as if approaching something dangerous without wanting to startle it. Her hand reached out just slightly, not touching me, but close enough to guide my attention toward her instead of the pill. When she leaned in, her voice dropped to a whisper so thin it barely reached me. "Don't swallow that pill. Check who brought it." The words landed heavily, without any drama. Just firm, controlled warning. I felt my hand go still, the pill sitting on my skin like a weight I suddenly didn't understand. For a moment, all I heard was the soft hum of the refrigerator in the next room and my own breathing slowing. I didn't ask why. I didn't move. I simply looked at her, searching her face for something that would soften the chill running through me. She gave nothing. No explanation, no hint. Just a tight glance toward the hallway, as if someone might be lingering there. The air in the room shifted with a quiet tension I hadn't noticed before, and I felt older than my 68 years, standing there in my own kitchen unsure of what I was holding. She straightened her posture, trying to appear neutral, but her eyes kept returning to the pill. I could see she wanted to say more, and couldn't. Her job depended on boundaries, and whatever she saw, whatever she suspected, lived in the silence between us. I followed her gaze toward the hall, half expecting someone to step out, but the space stayed empty and still. My fingers curled slightly around the pill without meaning to. It felt wrong, not in appearance, but in circumstance. I had taken medication for years, heart pressure, joint pain, the usual signs of a body aging predictably. Never once had a nurse warned me about a pill. Never once had I needed to question who placed something in my hand. Dignity comes in strange forms as you get older, and realizing how easily someone can interfere with your routine felt like losing a piece of it. The nurse cleared her throat softly, reminding me of her presence without drawing attention. She looked at me with a kind of restrained concern I didn't want to see, because it confirmed something I didn't want to imagine. I set the pill down on the counter without a word, feeling its absence in my palm like a ghost of trust I wasn't sure I still had. She didn't tell me to discard it. She didn't give instructions. She just nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as if to acknowledge that I understood enough. Not the whole danger, not the full picture, but enough to pause before taking something that didn't belong in my body. As I stood there, the quiet in the house felt heavier than usual. The warning lingered in the air between us, shaping itself into a truth I couldn't name yet, but felt settling into place. Someone had brought me a pill, and someone didn't want me to question it. After the nurse left, I sat at the kitchen table with my hands folded, letting the quiet of the house settle around me. It had been years since anyone warned me about anything in this home. After my wife died, the rooms took on a different tone. Still familiar, still mine, but lonelier in ways I didn't recognize at first. Illness crept in slowly during those years, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but makes small demands. New pills, more appointments, careful mornings. I handled it all alone because that was the only way I knew how to keep going. My niece started helping a few months ago, or at least that's what she called it. She was always the soft-spoken one when she was younger, always quick to offer a hand. When she came by after her mother passed, it felt natural to let her in. She brought groceries, cleaned shelves I never touched, and told me I shouldn't be doing everything by myself. I didn't argue. At my age, support doesn't always show up, and when it does, you try to appreciate it. But somewhere along the way, her visits changed. They got shorter, faster, like she was in a hurry to check a box. She stopped sitting for tea or asking how I slept. Instead, she moved through the house with a kind of purpose, touching drawers, checking dates on bottles, reorganizing things I didn't ask her to. I didn't think much of it then. People grow, lives get busy. I tried to understand that. Lately, though, she had become almost insistent about certain things. She told me she wanted to manage my medication schedule because it's safer that way. She said I shouldn't worry about calling the pharmacy or keeping track of dosages. She said, "Uncle, don't worry. I'll handle your pills." At the time, it sounded like care. Now, sitting with the memory replaying in my mind, those words felt different, too firm, too sure, as if she'd been preparing for that responsibility rather than offering it. I thought back to little moments I ignored, how she asked about my house, who would get it, whether I had a plan for it, how she once mentioned that maintaining properties alone wasn't ideal for someone my age. She said it casually, almost like a joke, but there was an underlying tone I didn't pick up then. I brushed it aside because family speaks freely, and you try not to find shadows where there shouldn't be any. But something had been shifting quietly. Her questions about my estate grew more frequent. She asked how many accounts I still had, whether I knew where all my documents were, and if I had updated my will to keep things simple. At the time, it sounded like responsibility. Now it echoed a little too close to the nurse's warning. The more I replayed our recent conversations, the more discomfort settled in. Not fear exactly, just a slow, cold mistrust building beneath the surface. She had taken the role of caretaker without ever asking if I needed one, and I had accepted it because loneliness makes you grateful for things you should probably examine more closely. I looked at the pill still sitting on the counter, the one I refused to take. It wasn't just the medication I was questioning now. It was everything that had quietly changed in the name of help. Everything I hadn't looked at twice because I believed family moved with good intentions. For the first time, I wasn't sure that belief was holding up. The next morning, I opened my pill organizer the way I always did, expecting the usual colors and labels lined up in predictable order. Instead, the compartments looked wrong. The stickers I'd placed weeks ago, simple labels showing morning, noon, and night, had been peeled off and replaced with new ones written in handwriting that wasn't mine. The arrangement felt unfamiliar, almost like someone had decided I needed a new system without telling me. I stared at it longer than I meant to, trying to understand why something so small felt so unsettling. I reached for the bottle the nurse had questioned, wanting to check it myself this time. When I turned it around, a different pharmacy name printed across the label caught my eye. I had used the same pharmacy for years, long enough that they knew me by name, but this label wasn't theirs. The format, the font, even the layout of instructions looked off. I read through the dosage line twice, then a third time. The milligrams listed didn't match what I'd been prescribed. Not even close. It wasn't an accidental refill. It was a replacement. That alone made my hand tighten around the bottle, but I forced myself to stay steady. I called my niece, keeping my tone light, asking casually whether she switched my medication or picked something up from a new place. She answered quickly, almost too quickly, brushing past the question. She said everything was handled and that I shouldn't worry about details. Then she cut the call short, claiming she was busy. Her voice didn't have the softness she used to reserve for me. It carried something colder, more impatient, like she wanted the conversation to disappear before it formed. Later that afternoon, the nurse came by for her usual visit. She checked my vitals with a careful calm, but her eyes kept moving toward the counter where the mismatched bottles sat. She didn't ask about it directly. Instead, she offered a quiet reminder to keep my original prescriptions close and to call her immediately if anything looked unexpected. There was restraint in her tone, the kind that told me she knew more than she was allowed to say. Her concern wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. After she left, I checked the mail. The box was empty, though I knew I was expecting medical statements that week. A few days earlier, I'd noticed gaps too. Missing appointment reminders, insurance letters that never arrived. I had assumed it was postal delay, but the pattern had grown too consistent. I started to feel as if someone else was sorting my mail before I ever saw it, choosing what I should and shouldn't receive. I placed all the scattered pieces on the kitchen table, the altered organizer, the mismatched bottle, the nurse's subtle tension, the missing mail, my niece's abrupt explanations. None of them alone would have meant much, but together they formed something I couldn't ignore. I wasn't imagining discomfort anymore. I wasn't misreading concern as control. Someone had begun shaping my treatment without asking me. Someone had decided they knew more about my medication than my own doctor. And for the first time, sitting in the home I'd lived in for decades, I felt the faint but undeniable sensation that I wasn't the only one making decisions about my health. I waited until the house felt still before making the call. The pharmacy answered on the second ring, The familiar automated voice replaced by a technician who had known my prescriptions for years. I read the number from the bottle slowly, each digit sounding heavier than it should. When she typed it in, there was a quiet pause, the kind that isn't casual. She told me, in a careful tone, that the medication didn't match anything in my history. No recent changes, no new orders, no record of that pill being linked to my file at all. After the call, I went online and checked my medical portal. I hadn't used it often, but I knew my way around the basics. The medication log showed an entry I didn't recognize. Family member requested adjustment to dosage. There was no name listed, just a timestamp from a week earlier. My doctor had never mentioned it. No appointment notes supported it. It was a change made without a reason and without my approval. I scrolled deeper into the document section and found a form uploaded under personal authorization. The signature at the bottom was supposed to be mine. It wasn't. Whoever had tried to imitate my handwriting didn't understand the way my wrist stiffened since the surgery last year, or how my old cursive dipped slightly on the right. The forgery wasn't loud or sloppy. It was controlled, practiced, but wrong in the ways someone close might overlook. The realization settled in with a steady coldness. This wasn't an accident. I walked to my desk in the living room, the place where I kept every medical paper since my wife passed. The drawer slid open with a familiar creak, but the contents were noticeably thinner. Folders were out, of order. A few envelopes were missing entirely, ones containing my insurance card copy, past prescriptions, and the medication summary I always kept on hand. Nothing else in the drawer had been touched. Only the documents someone would need to speak on my behalf were gone. Later that day, the nurse arrived for her routine visit. She checked my blood pressure, my pulse, my breathing, all with her steady professionalism. But when she noticed the empty spot on the counter where the questionable bottle had been, her eyes softened with something like sympathy. She asked if I had changed pharmacies recently. I said no. She hesitated, then quietly mentioned that my refills had come through strangely the last time she checked the system. She didn't explain further. Her job didn't allow her to, but the warning sat between us like a shared truth neither of us could speak freely about. When she left, I stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the silence of a home that had once felt safe. The scattered clues aligned themselves in my mind. The altered organizer, the new pharmacy label, the forged signature, the missing documents, the unauthorized dosage change. None of it pointed to care. All of it pointed to control, subtle, calculated, and growing. Fear didn't rise this time, not the same way. What settled instead was a different kind of clarity, a quiet, steady determination that replaced the earlier confusion. Someone close to me wanted authority over my health. Someone had decided my decisions weren't mine anymore, and that was the moment I knew I had to stop being passive. If they were planning to take control of my life, then it was time I took control of the truth. The envelope arrived in the afternoon, tucked between a grocery flyer and a utility bill. I opened it without thinking, expecting a routine statement. Instead, the words on the page made my breath slow. It was a medical bill, large, detailed, and listing tests I had never taken. Imaging scans, neurological assessments, cognitive screenings. At the bottom, in neat typed letters, it said, "Approved by patient." My name sat beside an electronic signature that didn't belong to my hand or my memory. I set the paper down slowly, as if being gentle with it would change what it meant. Before I could read it again, I heard the front door open with the same rushed push my niece always used. She walked in without waiting for a response, her eyes scanning the room before landing on the paper in my hand. Her smile flickered, then tightened into something forced. She moved toward me quickly, reaching for the bill with a tense, rehearsed calm. "That's just an insurance mistake," she said, her voice thin. "Let me take it. I'll sort it out." She didn't wait for permission. She tried to slide the paper from my grip, but I didn't let go. Her fingers hesitated, then pulled back as she forced another smile that didn't reach her eyes, the panic beneath. Her expression wasn't subtle. It leaked through every attempt she made to sound casual. I asked her what the tests were for. She didn't answer at first. She kept glancing toward the hallway as though expecting someone else to appear. When she finally spoke, her tone carried a sharpness I hadn't heard before. She said they were routine checks, and that I had agreed to them. But her voice wavered at the end, the way a lie does when it hasn't been fully practiced. I walked to the dining table and placed the bill next to the folder I'd been filling with all the strange documents. She saw the stack, forms, printouts, mismatched pill labels, and her face stiffened. Her defensiveness rose like a silent alarm. She stepped closer, lowering her voice, telling me not to overthink things, insisting she was only trying to help. But help doesn't come with forged signatures and hidden tests. Her urgency wasn't born from concern. It was born from being exposed. Later, as she stepped into the hallway to make a phone call, I heard her whispering. The walls in this house carry sound easily, and her words traveled with a clarity she didn't intend. "It has to be soon," she murmured. "He's not cooperating. We need the health decisions finalized. The inheritance stuff can't wait." My name wasn't spoken, but the meaning wrapped itself around me like cold air. When she returned, her smile was gone completely. She tried once more to gather the papers, insisting she should handle everything. But the act had already fallen apart. She didn't know I had heard her. She didn't know I could see how tightly her plan depended on my silence. I opened the folder and pulled out the form that had troubled me the most, the competency evaluation pre-filled with my details. The boxes were checked, the explanations typed out, the signature at the bottom forged with careful intent. She watched me hold it, her throat tightening as she realized I was seeing everything clearly now. In that moment, the truth settled into its final shape. This wasn't about medication mistakes or helpful intentions. This was about control, medical control, legal control, the kind that could erase my decisions and replace them with hers. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to replace me. I took the folder of papers with me the next morning, gripping it tightly as I sat in the waiting room of the elder law attorney. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each sound a reminder that I had waited too long already. When the receptionist called my name, I walked into an office lined with thick casebooks and framed credentials. The air felt still, controlled, as if the room itself understood the seriousness of what was about to be discussed. The attorney was a calm man in his 50s, with tired eyes that had clearly seen too many cases like mine. I placed the folder on his desk without speaking. He opened it slowly, scanning each page with careful precision. When he reached the forged competency form, he lifted it slightly, studying the signature with a quiet, practiced focus. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look confused. He looked resigned, like someone recognizing a pattern he'd traced too many times before. He laid the papers out in a line, the mismatched pill bottle, the unauthorized dosage change, the forged signature, the medical bill for tests I never had. When he spoke, his voice was even and steady, every word chosen with deliberate clarity. He told me the medication changes and fake authorizations were not random. They were common early steps in elder exploitation cases. Control the pills, control the medical narrative, control the narrative, control the person. He tapped the forged form with the end of his pen. This, he said, was the centerpiece. Once a false competency evaluation is filed, even a draft version, it creates a paper trail that can be used to argue diminished capacity. Combined with altered medication routines, it builds a story that makes the elder look confused, forgetful, or unwell, whether or not it's true. When he said this, something inside me settled with a cold, unavoidable understanding. Then he leaned back, folded his hands, and said the words that carved their way into me more deeply than any diagnosis ever had. "They're preparing to override your decisions." No emotion, no emphasis, just a fact stated plainly by a man who understood the machinery behind these schemes better than anyone. He began outlining what had to be done immediately. Lock down identification documents, freeze access to medical portals, reset every account tied to my name. He told me to keep all prescriptions in my possession and to notify my primary doctor directly about unauthorized changes. He explained how medication control was often tied to estate access, create a medical pretext for intervention, then position themselves as decision-makers for financial matters. It was a pattern with steps so cleanly aligned that my own situation fit almost perfectly. As he spoke, I didn't feel panic. What I felt was a steady, hollow clarity, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place with quiet finality. All the strange behaviors, the rushed visits, the new pharmacy, the missing mail, it all belonged to a plan that had been unfolding around me while I assumed family meant safety. When he finished, he asked if I understood the urgency. I nodded. There wasn't anything left to question. The path had already been chosen, not by me, but by the people who thought they could walk over my life without resistance. I left the office holding the folder against my chest. The sun outside felt harsher than usual, bright enough to make me squint as I stepped onto the sidewalk. Nothing looked different, yet everything had changed. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was the point where trusting the wrong person became dangerous, and there was no turning back. I spent the next 2 days tightening every part of my life that someone else had tried to loosen. I gathered all my medications and locked them in the small safe I once used for travel documents. I pulled my medical files from the shelves, sorted them by date, and placed them beside my identification cards and the legal papers the attorney helped me update. Each item I secured felt like reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd been losing. The house was quiet, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt protective. The change didn't go unnoticed. My niece showed up unannounced, her steps quick and sharp across the hardwood. She didn't ask how I was or whether I needed anything. She asked where the pills were. She asked why the medical forms weren't where she last saw them. She asked why I wasn't answering her messages. Each question carried less concern and more irritation, like she was discovering obstacles she hadn't planned for. When I told her I had things handled, her expression tightened with a hostility she didn't bother hiding. Her partner called later that evening, her voice clipped and impatient. She said we needed to finish the health directive and stop delaying necessary decisions. She repeated the phrase twice, as if rehearsed, as if the urgency wasn't mine to feel, but theirs to enforce. I let her talk while my phone, resting on the table, recorded every word. I kept my responses calm and simple, giving her nothing to twist. The restraint made her voice rise slightly, not in volume, but in pressure, quiet insistence turning into something sharper. That night, I checked the shared family email account we had once used to coordinate holiday plans. It hadn't been opened in months. Buried in the drafts folder were messages never sent but fully prepared. Each one outlined steps for a medical authority transfer, listing timelines, expected approval dates, and notes about filing for full health decision rights. There were references to me, but written as if I were an administrative task, not a person. Reading them made my chest tighten in a way no medication could fix. I sat back slowly, letting the glow of the screen fade across the room. The grief that surfaced wasn't loud or sudden. It rose like a slow tide, steady and heavy. I thought about the child I once helped raise, the homework I reviewed with her, the dinners we shared, the way she used to lean on me when life felt too big for her young shoulders. I remembered promising my late wife I would look after her brother's family, that I'd be the steady presence they could count on. Those memories didn't disappear. They just stood in painful contrast to the person she had chosen to become. I closed the laptop and rested my hand on the folder of evidence the attorney told me to document. Everything I needed for what came next was inside. Recordings, logs, forged forms, altered prescriptions. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel shock. What settled in me was a quiet resolve, firm enough to hold back the fear and steady enough to keep my voice level when the time came. The confrontation wasn't a choice anymore. It was the line I had to walk to protect myself, and I was ready to step over it with clear eyes. I called my niece early in the day and asked her to stop by, keeping my voice steady and unremarkable. I told her I needed some help reviewing a few insurance papers. Nothing urgent, nothing emotional, just enough to bring her without raising suspicion. When she walked in that afternoon, she carried the same confidence she always brought when she believed she was in control. I guided her to the dining table where the folder lay closed but waiting, its weight filling the room before a single page was touched. I opened it slowly, placing the forged competency form at the top, followed by the altered prescriptions and the mismatched bottle labels. Each document landed on the table with a quiet finality. She stiffened almost immediately, her eyes darting across the pages, her practiced calm slipping 1 inch at a time. She tried to smile, but the edges of it fractured. She said there had been mix-ups, clerical errors, misunderstandings. She blamed the nurse, the clinic, the system. Her denial came quickly, as if she believed speed could outrun the truth sitting in front of her. Before I could respond, her partner stepped inside as if she had been waiting nearby. She didn't greet me. She didn't ask what was happening. She walked straight to the table, saw the documents, and placed a fresh health directive form in front of me like a final push. She said we needed to finish this today, and that hesitation wasn't safe for someone in my condition. Her tone carried that familiar authority she used when she thought pressure would make me agree without thinking. The two of them stood close, speaking over one another, insisting I was misreading everything. They said I was overreacting, misunderstanding, forgetting details. They tried to corner me with soft urgency, telling me they were trying to protect me, that I needed someone to manage my decisions. Every word was chosen to sound like concern, but their eyes were sharp with impatience, not care. I let them continue until their explanations twisted into each other, each lie weakening the next. Then I reached for my phone and tapped the screen. The first recording played through the speaker, her partner's voice urging me to sign the directive, telling me not to delay necessary decisions. Then came the call where my niece asked about medications she had no right to touch. The recordings were clear, steady, and unmistakable. I placed the bank logs beside them, showing unauthorized access attempts tied directly to her device. I set the printed emails down last, the drafts outlining the medical authority transfer steps, each written in her own language. The room went still, drained of excuses. My niece's throat tightened as she stared at the emails. Her partner's jaw clenched, though she tried to hide it. Every part of their plan, every layer they had built so quietly, was now exposed on the table between us. They didn't speak at first. They just stood there, their expressions unraveling. The authority they carried when they walked into my home dissolved. My niece's eyes shifted downward, the facade she wore for months collapsing without a sound. Her partner opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again, realizing there was nothing left she could bend into a lie. I sat in silence, not to punish them, but because the truth no longer required a voice. Everything they had tried to hide was already in the open. The attorney moved quickly once he saw the full scope of what I brought him. He gathered the forged forms, the altered prescriptions, the recordings, and the email drafts, placing each piece of evidence into a structured file, as if assembling a puzzle he'd put together many times before. He didn't comment on the betrayal woven through every page. He simply told me he would file the elder exploitation and medical tampering complaints that afternoon. His tone wasn't triumphant, just steady, professional, and certain. It was the certainty I needed. A few days later, I sat in a small room at the local agency office while two investigators reviewed the evidence. They moved through each item with calm, methodical precision. When they questioned my niece, her responses were disjointed. She blamed paperwork mistakes, claimed the pharmacy misunderstood her, said she was only trying to protect me. But every explanation contradicted the documents in front of them. The recordings didn't bend to her story. Neither did the forged signature. Watching her shift the blame from one person to another felt like watching someone try to escape a room with no doors. Her partner didn't hold up much better. When asked about the medication changes, she tried to frame them as updates needed for safety. But the investigators had already contacted the pharmacy and clinic, both of which confirmed the same thing. Unauthorized adjustments had been made, and none of them came from me or my doctor. The pharmacist even provided a written statement that the bottle I found had been filled without any matching record under my profile. The clinic sent logs verifying that a family requester had attempted to modify my medical permissions. The pattern was undeniable now, not just to me, but to the people who mattered. Within a week, official notices were drafted and finalized. My niece and her partner were stripped of any medical access or authority related to my care. Their names were removed from every contact field, every emergency file, every record they had quietly inserted themselves into. It wasn't a dramatic event. There were no raised voices, no accusations thrown across a table. It was procedural, silent signatures, logged decisions, and system updates that erased their influence one entry at a time. I sat with the attorney afterward to finalize my protections. We updated my emergency contacts, ensuring only verified individuals could speak on my behalf. We placed restrictions around decision-making rights and documented my medication instructions in ways that required multiple confirmations before any changes could be made. It was tedious, quiet work, but necessary. The kind of rebuilding you don't celebrate, but commit to because you must. When it was done, I thanked the attorney and stepped outside. The air felt heavier than I expected, not oppressive, just full, like emotions settling into their final place. I had regained control of my life, my choices, my health. But the victory didn't carry pride. It carried a wound, the understanding that someone I once loved, someone who once ran through my home like a child seeking safety, had spent months reshaping my life into something that benefited them. I walked to the car slowly, each step a reminder that survival doesn't always come with relief. Sometimes it just comes with clarity. I was safer now, unquestionably. The danger had been contained, the plan dismantled, the system set right. But as I sat behind the wheel and closed the door, the ache of what I'd lost settled into a quiet place inside me. I had protected myself, and in doing so, I learned who I could never trust again. In the quiet weeks that followed, I found myself thinking about the ways betrayal begins. It doesn't start with a loud argument or a sudden shift. It starts in silence. Small choices made when you're not looking. Small liberties taken because someone assumes your trust will cover their tracks. I had spent months believing the people around me were helping, not realizing how quickly help can become control when you stop paying attention. Looking back, I understood that danger doesn't always walk through the front door. Sometimes it's invited in because you assume family means safety. I had always believed my age made me vulnerable, that growing older meant losing ground little by little. But the truth settled in differently. What made me vulnerable wasn't the years behind me. It was the loyalty I carried toward people I thought I understood. I trusted because I wanted to, because I believed care still came from the same place it used to. That belief made me blind in ways I never imagined. Age wasn't the weakness. Assumed trust was. So I made quiet changes. Nothing dramatic, nothing worth announcing. I put my documents in order, keeping them where only I could reach. I learned to ask questions even when the answers seemed obvious. I checked every refill, every appointment reminder, every message from the clinic. I didn't do it out of fear. I did it out of respect for myself, for the years I had lived and the life I had built. Independence doesn't vanish with age. It fades only when you stop maintaining it. Managing my medications became part of my routine again. I lined the pill organizer myself, labeled each compartment with my own handwriting, and kept the bottles arranged the way they had been before someone else replaced them without permission. I returned to scheduling my appointments directly with the clinic, speaking to the staff who had known me long before any of this began. Each small task added a layer of steadiness back into my days. Some afternoons, I would sit in the living room, surrounded by the things my wife and I collected over decades. Her framed photos, the quilt she made before her illness, the old clock she insisted we never replace. Keeping our home the way it was became a quiet promise to both of us. I protected what we built, not because it was valuable in money, but because it was ours. No one had the right to carve into that history for their own gain. I didn't hold bitterness toward the people who tried to take control of my life. Bitterness attaches itself too deeply, and I didn't want to carry their choices any longer than I had to. But caution stayed with me, steady and sharp. Trust had to be guarded now, not assumed. It had to be earned with consistency, not claimed because of shared blood or familiar faces. In the end, I understood something that took nearly 70 years to learn. People don't always change in ways you can see, and danger doesn't always show its teeth before it moves. But I also understood that clarity is a kind of strength, and strength can return at any age if you choose to reclaim it. Growing old isn't the danger. Trusting the wrong person is.